Step inside the cobblestone streets of medieval London, circa 1350, and you'll encounter something that might surprise you. The aroma of fresh bread mingles with the pungent smell of salted fish, while merchants hawk their wares from wooden stalls that line the narrow thoroughfares. But this isn't just any marketplace. This is the beating heart of medieval commerce, where ordinary people made extraordinary choices about what to put on their tables. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you think you know about medieval shopping. While Hollywood depicts peasants gnawing on turkey legs and drinking ale from enormous tankards, the reality was far more complex and infinitely more fascinating. The medieval grocery shop, or rather, the network of specialized merchants and market stalls that served this function, reveals a world of sophisticated commerce, exotic imports, and daily decisions that would determine not just what people ate, but whether they lived or died. Today, we're peeling back the layers of history to examine what medieval people actually bought, how they shopped, and why their purchasing decisions were matters of life and death in ways we can barely imagine. The stories contained within these ancient transactions tell us more about medieval life than any castle wall or illuminated manuscript ever could. By the end of this journey, you'll understand not just what filled medieval stomachs, but how an entire civilization organized itself around the simple act of buying food. But first, we need to understand something crucial about medieval shopping that most people get completely wrong. There was no single grocery shop as we know it today. Instead, medieval commerce was an intricate web of specialized merchants, each operating under strict guild regulations that determined everything from the quality of goods sold to the exact hours they could conduct business. This wasn't primitive. It was incredibly sophisticated, just organized in ways that would seem alien to modern consumers. The medieval marketplace operated on principles that seem almost magical today. Trust was everything, because there were no barcodes, no ingredient labels, no government inspections. When a housewife approached a grain merchant's stall, she was engaging in a ritual of examination that required skills we've completely forgotten. She could tell the quality of wheat by its color, its weight, the sound it made when poured from hand to hand. A slight discoloration might indicate rot that could poison her entire family. The wrong texture could mean the grain had been diluted with sawdust or sand by unscrupulous dealers. Let's start with bread, because in medieval society, bread wasn't just food. It was currency, status symbol, and survival itself rolled into one. The phrase breaking bread takes on profound meaning when you realize that bread constituted up to 80% of the average medieval person's caloric intake. But here's what's fascinating. Medieval people didn't buy bread the way we do. They bought grain and paid the baker to bake it, or they bought the right to use the communal oven. The quality of your bread announced your social status to everyone who saw it. White bread was the ultimate luxury, available only to the wealthy, because it required the finest flour, sifted multiple times to remove all bran and impurities. The poor ate dark bread made from barley, rye, or oats, sometimes mixed with peas or beans when grain was scarce. But even this hierarchy had nuances that revealed the complexity of medieval society. Brown bread wasn't necessarily inferior. Some varieties were considered healthier and more substantial than white bread, preferred by merchants and craftsmen who needed sustenance for physical labor. No, the bread market operated under the assize of bread, a complex legal framework that regulated everything from the weight of loaves to the profit margins bakers could charge. This wasn't simple price control. It was a sophisticated economic system designed to prevent famine and social unrest. Bakers who cheated customers faced punishments that ranged from fines to being dragged through the streets on a hurdle, the same device used to transport condemned criminals to execution. But bread was just the foundation of medieval shopping. The real complexity emerged when people sought protein, and here's where medieval commerce becomes truly fascinating. Meat wasn't simply meat. It was a carefully categorized system of fresh, salted, smoked, and preserved options that determined not just taste, but shelf life and social acceptability. Fresh meat was available only to those who lived near the source or could afford to buy an entire animal at once. Most medieval shoppers dealt with preserved meats that could last weeks or months. Salt pork was the backbone of medieval protein consumption, not because people preferred it, but because it was the most reliable way to preserve meat before refrigeration. The quality of salt itself became crucial. Bad salt could ruin an entire winter's worth of preserved meat, condemning a family to starvation. The fish trade reveals even more about medieval shopping priorities. Friday was fish day across Christian Europe, creating a massive weekly demand that merchants had to anticipate and supply. But medieval fish shopping required expertise that would challenge modern consumers. Freshwater fish carried different risks than saltwater varieties. Certain fish could only be safely eaten during specific seasons. Preserved fish came in dozens of varieties: salted, smoked, pickled, dried, each with different preparation requirements and storage needs. Herring dominated the medieval fish market because it could be preserved effectively and transported across vast distances. But here's what's remarkable. Medieval consumers could identify dozens of herring varieties by sight, taste, and smell. They knew which regions produced the best quality, which preservation methods were most reliable, and how to detect fish that had gone bad in ways that could prove fatal. Spices occupied a unique position in medieval shopping because they served multiple functions simultaneously. Yes, they flavored food, but they also preserved it, masked the taste of spoiled ingredients, and demonstrated wealth and sophistication. The spice trade connected medieval European shoppers to merchants in India, China, and the Middle East through a network of middlemen that made these seasonings more valuable than gold by weight. A medieval shopper approaching a spice merchant's stall faced choices that could bankrupt a household or elevate a meal into something approaching luxury. Black pepper was so valuable, it was sometimes used as currency. Saffron cost more than most people earned in a year. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves were treasures that transformed the simplest ingredients into feasts worthy of nobility. But spices weren't just about flavor. They were medicine. Medieval people believed that the right combination of spices could cure diseases, improve digestion, and even influence personality. A housewife buying ginger wasn't just seasoning her cooking. She was purchasing what she believed was a cure for stomach ailments and a way to warm her family during cold winters. The complexity of medieval spice shopping extended to quality assessment that required genuine expertise. Merchants routinely diluted expensive spices with cheaper alternatives, mixed old stock with fresh, and presented inferior grades as premium products. Buyers learned to detect these deceptions through techniques passed down through generations: testing texture, evaluating color, assessing aroma intensity. Vegetables and fruits occupied a different category in medieval shopping, governed by seasonal availability and preservation challenges that modern consumers can barely imagine. Without refrigeration or modern preservation techniques, medieval people had to time their purchases precisely with growing seasons and develop sophisticated methods for extending the life of perishable goods. Root vegetables like turnips, parsnips, and onions formed the foundation of medieval vegetable consumption because they stored well through winter months. But even these humble ingredients required careful selection and storage techniques. A housewife examining turnips in a medieval market was looking for signs that would indicate how long they would last, whether they had been properly harvested, and if they showed any indication of rot that could spread to other stored vegetables. Medieval fruit shopping reveals fascinating insights into how people balanced immediate gratification against long-term survival. Fresh fruits were seasonal luxuries that had to be consumed quickly or preserved through drying, pickling, or conversion into wines and ciders. Apple orchards were valuable property because apples could be stored through winter months if properly managed. Dried fruits represented concentrated nutrition and natural sweetness that could transform simple meals into special occasions. The preservation of fruits involved techniques that seem almost alchemical today. Medieval people knew how to create fruit leathers, preserve whole fruits in honey, and ferment fruit juices into alcoholic beverages that served both nutritional and social functions. A medieval household's fruit storage represented months of careful planning, precise timing, and accumulated knowledge about which varieties preserved best under different conditions. The dairy trade in medieval markets operated under conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors. Yet it sustained entire communities through systems of quality control that relied entirely on human expertise. When a medieval shopper approached a dairy vendor, she entered into a complex negotiation that involved not just price, but freshness, fat content, and the reputation of specific cows from known farms. Fresh milk was a luxury available only to those living near dairy farms or wealthy enough to keep their own cows. Most medieval consumers dealt with preserved dairy products that could survive the journey from rural producers to urban markets. Cheese represented the pinnacle of dairy preservation technology, transforming perishable milk into products that could last months or even years. But medieval cheese wasn't simply cheese. It was a sophisticated category system that modern consumers would find bewildering. Hard cheeses, soft cheeses, aged varieties, fresh options, each with specific storage requirements and preparation methods. The quality of medieval cheese depended on factors that buyers learned to assess through generations of accumulated knowledge. The color, texture, aroma, and even the sound a cheese made when tapped could reveal its age, quality, and remaining shelf life. Butter occupied a unique position in medieval dairy commerce because it served functions far beyond simple cooking fat. Medieval butter was medicine, preservative, and luxury item simultaneously. The process of making and storing butter required expertise that could mean the difference between having fat stores through winter or facing malnutrition during the lean months. Medieval shoppers evaluated butter quality through techniques that seem almost supernatural today. They could determine the diet of the cows that produced it, identify whether it had been properly salted for preservation, and assess whether it would remain edible for weeks or months of storage. Poor quality butter didn't just taste bad, it could become rancid in ways that made entire food stores inedible. The grain trade reveals perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of medieval shopping, because grain wasn't just food. It was the foundation of economic stability for entire regions. Medieval grain markets operated on principles that connected local harvests to international trade routes, seasonal variations to long-term storage strategies, and individual household needs to community survival requirements. When medieval shoppers examined grain, they were making decisions that would affect their families for months at a time. The quality of wheat, barley, oats, or rye determined not just the taste of bread, but its nutritional value, its storage life, and its resistance to pests and spoilage. Medieval consumers could identify grain varieties by sight, assess their moisture content by touch, and determine their age and origin through subtle indicators that modern consumers would never notice. The complexity of medieval grain shopping extended to understanding seasonal price fluctuations, storage requirements, and processing needs. Buying grain required knowledge of milling processes, storage techniques, and pest control methods that could preserve food stores through winter months, or protect them from the rats and insects that could destroy entire household reserves. Medieval beverages presented shopping challenges that reveal the sophisticated chemistry knowledge ordinary people possessed. Water quality was unreliable and often dangerous, making fermented beverages essential for daily survival. Ale, wine, cider, and mead weren't luxuries. They were necessities that provided both nutrition and safety from waterborne diseases. Ale dominated medieval beverage consumption because it could be produced locally from available grains and provided essential calories along with alcohol content that killed harmful bacteria. Medieval ale shoppers needed to assess freshness, alcohol strength, and brewing quality through sensory evaluation that required genuine expertise. Bad ale wasn't just unpleasant. It could indicate brewing problems that made it unsafe to drink. Wine represented a more complex category in medieval beverage shopping because it connected local markets to international trade networks. Wine quality varied dramatically based on grape varieties, growing regions, vintage years, and storage conditions. Medieval wine consumers developed sophisticated palates that could identify regional characteristics, assess aging potential, and determine appropriate food pairings. The medieval marketplace wasn't primitive commerce. It was a sophisticated system where survival depended on expertise we've completely forgotten. Every purchase required skills that transformed ordinary shoppers into masters of quality assessment, preservation techniques, and seasonal planning. These weren't just transactions. They were the daily negotiations between life and death that built the foundation of European civilization. Next time you grab groceries without a second thought, remember the medieval housewife who could save or doom her family with a single purchasing decision.